Hi everyone, my name is Chris Collison, and today we're going to talk about how to write an abstract for the course Chemistry 155. An abstract is the first thing that most readers come to in the top of a scientific paper. It's going to provide a summary of the work, and it needs to be clear, concise, and compelling. So in this particular course that you are working through this semester, you will need to submit an abstract for each experiment that you do, and you're going to gain credit for that particular abstract for each experiment. And I'm going to now provide some tips on what I'm looking for and what we're looking for. It can be boiled down into a few simple points. What did you do? How did you do it? There must be a summary of the results, and typically you're going to provide some description of the errors associated with those results. So maybe some error bars. That will evolve over the course of the semester. So let's take a look. Well, the important thing about any abstract is for that abstract to be clear, concise, and compelling. So the attributes that you need to include are a statement of what you did, how you did it, and a summary of the results, including some error analysis. Let's look at some examples. We recently worked through an Excel spreadsheet exercise regarding burette calibration. What we need to put into the abstract is an introduction that leads into the what was done in that particular experiment while not actually saying in this lab. This forces you to think. So in this particular class, we're forcing you to think about what you did and to introduce the what with an appropriate leading sentence. Next, you have to say how you did the experiment, but at the same time, do not include all the gory details. That would be found in the body of the experimental lab report. In this case, you're just writing an abstract. But you can say what techniques were used. We'll look at some examples shortly. You also need to include a summary of the results, including some description of the errors. So, to illustrate, let's think about what you should avoid saying. I've said already we should not say the word "in this lab." So in this particular case, we would not write "in this lab we calibrated a burette." Other things that many students do when they submit their abstracts is they choose words that are somewhat vague, or verbs that are somewhat vague. In this particular case, multiple volumes were used is a vague choice of verb. Furthermore, we got the masses from the balance demonstrates actually two problems. One, we tend not to use the first person tense in our abstracts, so try to avoid using the words we or I in your abstracts. But also, the verb got is also particularly vague. Lastly, we don't want to include so much gory detail, as I mentioned. So in this particular case, I won't read it, but there's way too much detail in this particular sentence regarding 10 milliliters, 20 milliliters, how we cleaned the flask with soap, water, etc. We don't need to put all that detail into our abstract. So what would be the solutions that we might write for this particular set of problems? So try saying instead of saying "in this lab we calibrated a burette," introduce more effectively what you're trying to do. And here's an example. Burettes are pieces of precision glassware used for accurate volume measurement. Nevertheless, experimental accuracy requires that the burette is calibrated in order to have confidences in the results. A calibration was carried out by. So this basically tells the reader what was done and maybe some motivation as to why it was being done. That's a good approach to telling the reader what is being carried out for a particular experiment and the associated abstract. We follow on from this sentence actually by addressing the problem of poorly chosen verbs. So in this case, we might go on to say a calibration was carried out by delivering fixed volumes of water as measured from the gradations on the side of the burette. Instead of saying we got the masses, we might then go on to say these volumes were weighed on a balance and the actual volume delivered was back calculated given the known density of water and the high accuracy of the mass balance used. Therefore, here we're using weighed and back calculated. These verbs tell the reader very specifically what's actually being done, and we can take a clear and concise approach in our abstract. Finally, the last, the details from the previous slide. Again, the idea here is simply to condense. We can remove this detail, we must retain clarity, and then also we must remain concise. Lastly, what about errors? So what you'll see in front of you here is the whole abstract that I might write to describe the calibration of a particular burette. And at the end here, I'm stating in bold, actual volumes were plotted against the volumes that were expected, resulting in a straight line plot of slope 1.00168 with an error of plus or minus 0.00053 at the 95% confidence level. If you go back and look at my prior presentations on Microsoft Excel and how to use regression analysis, we can find that these errors can be calculated very easily within a few seconds, in fact. And the important thing here is that we get into the habit of expressing the error of a particular measurement. All measurements have associated errors, and we need to get into the habit of telling the audience the truth of our situation, telling the audience how confident we are of the results. That is the job of a scientist, and that's what we're training you to be. So those are some thoughts on writing an abstract. Again, the key ideas: clear, concise, and compelling. What did you do? How did you do it? Summarize the results with errors. Keep it brief and keep it clear. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.